Applause was never free in my family, and it never had my name on it. The dining room gleamed like a stage. Crystal broke the light. The mahogany table shone. Turkey steam mixed with cloves. Our ancestors looked down like judges. Frost traced the panes. We waited for the cue. My father tapped his spoon once twice. My mother's pearls were exact, the linen sharp. Ethan sat to father's right, smiling as if the chair had always belonged to him. He occupied it like sunlight in a window. His cufflinks flashed. He didn't see me at all. Family father said, voice warm with bourbon. Tonight we recognize work and promise. He paused. Mother lifted a velvet box. Father tossed a key ring over the centerpiece. Ethan caught it one-handed. Laughter moved. A chrome horse winked under the chandelier. Mustang father said. Used, but hail red. She'll take you to Chapel Hill and back. Aunts chorused, well deserved. Ethan bowed. Maddie watched, composed and distant. When the noise thinned, I cleared my throat. It sounded like a fork nicking china. I pulled a medal from my backpack, kept in a sock so the ribbon wouldn't fray. It was heavier than it looked, stamped with the state seal, still smelling faintly of the gym where I'd won that afternoon. I held it up and stepped forward. My voice steadied. I won today. First place. Sustainable agriculture. The judge said father didn't look. He glanced at mother, and together they performed the old choreography, his breath, her hands, the tiny turn that meant, not now. He took the disc, weighed it like a coin, and set it beside a napkin stippled with gravy. That won't get you a husband, he said, not unkindly, not kindly either, and the room laughed, relieved by a sentence that kept the world arranged. Heat climbed my neck. The portraits pressed at my back. Someone passed the rolls. A cousin asked Ethan to take the Mustang out after pie. He said sure and spun the keys. Mother raised her glass for the real toast to the car, the sun, the promise. My hands were empty. Conversation broke before it reached my chair. My father repeated a line about leadership he'd used when winning felt like inheritance. I traced the medal's edge. The ribbon drooped. Cheer up, Charlie, an uncle said with a good-natured thump that found bone. I smiled the way girls are taught to smile when a man is sure he's helped. Ethan leaned back, gaze passing over me, then the medal, then me again. It wasn't cruelty. It was inventory, his keys, his audience, his orbit. The smirk arrived last, lazy and exact, sealing the moment like a stamp in warm wax. I sat. The turkey was carved, gravy pooled. Outside, the pasture went black as a shutter slid. Inside, applause started again, smaller, scattered, but it skipped my name. I folded my hands and practiced disappearing the way some girls practice piano metronomes, steady. In my head, I opened a ledger, debts and gifts. Numbers would come later. For now, I kept the habit of counting. The medal stayed where he'd put it, the ring of grease widening. I watched the disc like a distant storm, close enough to taste metal, too far to change. Maddie reached for her water. Her fingers brushed the ribbon and recoiled. I set my hands on my knees and learned the first rule here. Clapping is currency, and some of us are paid in silence. The chandelier hummed softly, guarding the room's hush. Now. That night, I learned silence could wound more than applause. If home was a prison, the army was my escape tunnel. June heat pressed the windows. Thunder walked the ridge, counting between flash and rumble. Same table, same seating chart. My father at the head, my mother policing smiles, Ethan to his right, certain the room turned because he was in it. I set my glass down and it sweated into my hand. I have something to say, I told the room. Forks froze. I'm enlisting. After basic, I'll aim for special forces. Lightning bleached the glass. My father's jaw squared. My mother reached for her pearls. Charlotte, she said, breath clipped. Don't be dramatic. To him, softer. She's only 18. It's a decision, I said. And it's mine. My father's palm hit the table. Thunder answered from the hills. Over my dead body. You will not drag this family into some spectacle. You are not a son. You are not built for that life. I had trained for this long before I said it. Pre-dawn runs, barn pull-ups, maps under my mattress. I am built for it. I answered quieter than rain on the panes. And I will go. My mother began to cry in neat, careful sobs. People will talk, she whispered. They'll say we raised you wrong, that we can't keep a girl safe. She reached for my hand, then clasped her own, worrying a napkin. Ethan stood and crooked a finger. Come here. In the hall, the portraits watched like a jury. He leaned close enough that I could smell wet wool. You'll fail, he murmured. Don't crawl back. The words sank hot iron in water. A reply rose, names of women who'd done the work tests I'd studied, the way a compass steadies if your hand does, but I swallowed it. He waited like a fisherman for a tug he owned. Back at the table, my father wore his calm like a jacket. There will be no more of this, he said. No recruiters. No forms. You will apply to college like your brother. Rain found a rhythm in the gutters. I saw the future. He slid across the table, a corridor with no doors wallpapered with others' expectations. I saw another shape, an opening in concrete, narrow and dark, just big enough for breath. I've already spoken to a recruiter, I said. My mother gasped. Color climbed his neck. I turn 18 this week. I'll sign myself. Don't you dare, he said. For the first time, his words came late. Ethan smiled, the old indulgent smile. You'll call when it gets hard, he said. Don't pretend you won't. Under the table, I curled my hand until nails marked my palm. I pictured a ruck on my shoulders, the cool face of a compass on my thumbnail nights, where the sky is a map, only the stubborn read. The house hummed with rain. My mother breathed my name. My father breathed like a judge. Ethan waited for me to flinch. I didn't. I held my breath until the urge to argue tempered. If I answered, I would feed their story. I would give them something to retell. I lifted my chin and let the room test a silence it could not move. We finished dinner politely. Plates stacked. The storm edged east. I carried dishes to the sink. Hot water fogged the window, erasing our reflection. I dried my hands, returned, and met each of their eyes, not to plead, not to fight, but to mark the moment in a ledger I finally owned. Somewhere, a dish clinked in the drying rack, a small domestic bell that sounded like a dismissal. I stayed, so I clenched my fist and said nothing. That silence became my oath. The forest didn't care if I was a Hale, it only cared if I survived. The swamp had no patience for names. It swallowed boots and pride with the same hunger. Midnight pressed down like a lid, the trees dripping the air wet enough to drink. My rucksack cut into my shoulders, 80 pounds of proof that I belonged, proof no one else here believed in. Ethan's voice from years before had followed me into this dark. You'll fail. Don't crawl back. Every step I took was an answer, but not one I'd ever waste on him out loud. We'd been dropped in pairs and squads across the training area, tasked with finding coordinates under a sky that hid more than it revealed. Fort Bragg's pine forest stretched endless swamp, weaving between the trunks like traps, set by someone with a cruel sense of humor. I gripped my compass until the cold metal dug crescents into my skin. Around me, the men muttered. They didn't bother hiding their doubt. Go home and cook Benson. One of them sneered. He was built like a boulder, sweat plastering his hair to his forehead. This isn't Girl Scouts. The others laughed, relief in their voices. It was easier to jeer than admit the swamp scared them too. I said nothing. Silence had long since become my weapon. Their insults couldn't find a target if I refused to raise a shield. I just adjusted my compass, angled my map to the faint starlight leaking through pine branches, and kept moving. Hours bled together. Mud clung up to the knees, pulling at every step. Branches raked arms raw. The night swallowed the sound of breathing until panic began to scratch at the edges of the squad. We hit a swamp pocket deeper than the rest, the ground giving way with every push. One cadet cursed and flailed, another snapped at him to shut up, and soon the whole team was yelling in the dark like children lost in a carnival maze. I stood apart listening. The stars had cleared a patch of sky above, faint but certain. I tilted my head back, measuring them against the terrain in memory. Orion's belt cut sharp lines. The North Star held steady. I found our error, the angle of drift that had crept in when panic took over, and corrected it. "Follow me," I said finally. My voice cut through the squabble low, even not asking. They stared as if daring me to lead them wrong. I started walking, not turning to check. One by one, boots slogged after me. The swamp hissed with insects. The night pressed in. But the compass needle steadied with each step. I counted my paces, whispered bearings under my breath. East by northeast through the thickets across a shallow ridge where the ground turned firmer. Behind me, the grumbling slowed. The panic dulled into grudging silence. No one wanted to admit I was right. They just wanted out of the mess. By the time the first pink streaks bled into the horizon, we stumbled into the rendezvous clearing, mud slick and half dead with exhaustion. The marker flag snapped in the early breeze, proof that we had made it back with minutes to spare. I bent over, hands braced on my knees, lungs heaving. My hair clung to my face, caked with swamp water and grit. One of the biggest men, the same who'd told me to go home, looked at me. For a long moment his expression didn't change. Then something flickered, almost invisible respect, reluctant and sharp-edged, but there. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence was an admission, the kind of acknowledgement no toast at the Hale table had ever given me. Mud coated my uniform, filled my boots, chilled my skin. But the respect clinging to me weighed more, and it was mine alone. Respect earned in mud is harder to steal than medals on a wall. Blood betrayed me. War gave me brothers. The evening blast slapped tin and Hesco, then left grit on our tongues and a diesel film in the air. Bulbs stitched light across the outpost. Sand hissed through the wire. We stuffed burlap where shrapnel gnawed and pretended the quiet was normal. Ortiz found me at the water tank, grin under a smear of soot. "Major," he said, "your fan club is catering." He raised a mess tray, 2 MRE pound cakes fused by grape jam, a spent casing stuck upright as a candle. I laughed. We ducked into the tent where a lantern trembled on a crate. "Don't say we never bring culture," someone announced. Off-key humming gathered nerve. The worst voice leaped first and dragged the rest into a ragged, earnest chorus. They sang my name like a password. When the last note collapsed, Ortiz produced his real gift, a flat, wind-worn stone. Its outline, lopsided and unmistakable, was Virginia. "Picked it outside the wire," he said, sincerity displacing the grin. "Figured you'd want to hold home, not just remember it." He pressed it into my hand. A pale vein ran north like a river on a map. Cold traveled from my fingers to a place under my breastbone I protect. For a second, the outpost blurred. I saw fence frost and a porch light left for luck. "Make a wish," someone urged. "Not for better cake." I broke the rectangle with a plastic fork. Crumbs skittered like grit across metal. The generator found its rhythm again, a slow heartbeat. We swapped small stories and sips from canteens. A shoulder leaned into mine long enough to mean, "We're here." Later, when the tent emptied and the lantern dimmed, Ortiz and I sat with our backs to sandbags, boots touching like a quiet pact. The sky was a black page pricked by fire. He rolled the stone and traced the pale vein with his thumb. "Highway," he said. "Or a spine." "Both," I said. "Depends what you drive with." "Blood's a tricky fuel," he said. "Mine misfires," I answered. He didn't argue, didn't fix. He nudged the stone toward me. "Take the weight that helps." He tried a joke about deep-sea fishing off Carolina, how he fed sharks 3 sandwiches and his pride. The punchline limped. The comfort landed. The knot under my ribs loosened a notch. Wind slid through a canvas seam like a cool hand, and a guard cleared his throat twice the nothing-to-report code. I walked the line once more. Stars chalked angles I trust. The wire hummed patient. Back at the crate, I took the stone again and closed my hand until my pulse found it. I wasn't praying, but the word I breathed felt like a truth-catching thank you. For the bad singing, the ugly cake, the ordinary miracle of being wanted without performance. When I slid the stone into my pocket, it fit as if the pocket had been sewn around the idea of it. The men were playing spades, arguing over a rule none of them planned to follow. Ortiz lifted 2 fingers without looking up. You good? I answered with a nod. He wouldn't praise. The rock sat against my thigh like a compass that measured belonging instead of bearing. He walked me to the flap shoulder to shoulder, then tapped the bent casing. Fine dining inland edition. His grin arrived quick as a match in wind. I answered with my teeth rare in uniform. I curled my fingers around Virginia and understood family could be a verb. At lights out, the generator sighed, the desert breathed, and the outpost settled on its haunches, awake in the way wild things sleep. I lay down with the stone in my palm edges, pressing a map into skin. Gratitude rose simple and exact. I lifted the rock so only I would hear it. Thank you, I whispered. I didn't know the desert would claim him before the year ended. Sometimes betrayal arrives in handwriting you once trusted. The mess tent held the day's heat like a tin cup holds the ghost of coffee. Diesel clung to canvas, dust powdered benches. A mail sack hit the table and men drifted toward it with the quiet greed of hope. Then I saw my name in block APO letters and slanting across the corner like an old habit, Ethan's cursive, the long-tailed Y, the hard-pressed T's that always looked as if he were crossing something out. My pulse jumped. I stepped into the fading glare and sat on a sandbag. The paper smelled of lemon oil and laundry heat. He asked if I was eating, said Maddie had found better coffee, Dad still over-salted steaks. Mom had planted rosemary in the crack by the back step. Then the turn casual enough to hide the hinge. I've got a friend, good guy looking at reconstruction contracts, he wrote. Wants to do some real good. Do you know which routes are actually safe these days? Which contractors are reliable? He softened it with flattery. I always trusted your judgment. You're closer to this than we are. The lines looked like a hand held over a gap. I wanted to take it. Right then. Ortiz dropped beside me, webbing clattering. He nodded at the envelope. From home, Ethan, I said. What's he want to help someone help? I said. Roots? Vendors? His mouth thinned the way it did when a report came in too neat. Be careful who you trust. He tapped the margin. Sometimes a good guy is just a guy who found a better story. It's Ethan, I said, and heard the wobble. Inside the tent tasted like aluminum spoons and overboiled coffee. I read the letter again. I told myself the things we tell ourselves when we want yes. Nothing here was classified. Common sense has long corridors. Sketching the terrain's temperament wasn't handing out the map. That night, at a plywood desk where the lamp turned dust to gold, I wrote back careful. I spoke in timing, not coordinates, dawn convoys on certain stretches, market days that choke a checkpoint, vendors who never watered down gauze, a post that bottlenecks because a cousin insists on hand-counting crates. I didn't write frecks. I didn't write grids. I underlined a warning about how everything changes. Ortiz set a deck of cards down and watched me seal the flap. Mail it tomorrow, he said. I will. Or burn it and send 2 words, ask state. I smiled like it was a joke and slid the letter into my notebook. Morning made everything look reasonable. I walked the envelope to the slot and felt the lightness that comes when weight leaves your hand. I tucked the clerk's receipt into the notebook where I keep small confirmations, bearings, distances, who said what, when. At lunch, I traced the handwriting that made me 8 and 12 and 15 at once. He'd drawn a small arrow by a joke about me stealing his fries. He'd written proud of you, you know, underlined with a little flourish. Gratitude rose quick and thirsty. It's easy to drink too fast when someone finally offers you water. Ortiz slid across from me with eggs hammered into egg shape. Mailed. Yeah. Good. Straight arrows still land where someone aims them. I wanted to argue that family wasn't a weapon unless you handed it to someone. What I said instead was smaller. He just wants to understand. Maybe Ortiz said. The afternoon cracked open with tasking. Night knit with a checklist. After chow, I walked to the wire, the Virginia-shaped stone warm in my pocket. Far east, a dull glow suggested a city no one named on the radio. The wind moved over my knuckles. The rock cooled in my palm. I told myself I'd done a good thing. I told myself it mattered that Ethan had written proud. I had just handed my brother the first weapon he would ever use against me. They called it madness. I called it remembering. The moon drew a pale ribbon along the fire road. I parked beyond the last pullout, cupped a red-lensed headlamp, and let the world narrow to footfall heartbeat, the click of a compass at my zipper. The map was habit. I knew the notch, the shoulder, the granite lip where the wind climbed. I brought what I always bring: a thermos, a pencil, a field book, and the Virginia stone Ortiz pressed into my hand. It fit as if skin had learned its edge. The overlook opened. The Shenandoah unrolled, river black as cable farms in shadow a town's lone light. I killed the lamp. I stood where lichen silvered the ledge and set the thermos down. I did the time math, thumbed my watch to UTC, and spoke the first name. Another name then, another a cadence. Not quite prayer, not quite roll. The forest answered with small approvals. A pine, tick, an owl, a fox stitching the dark with light feet. I pressed the stone until its edge printed my skin, then set it on the ledge, a stand-in for ground I could not visit. Breath found a rhythm. Faces surfaced: Miller's shoulders, Chen's laugh, Ortiz, tilting a deck. I did not say why. The why is a room I keep locked. A branch cracked below Deer Small. I didn't turn. I unzipped my pocket, pulled the phone, dimmed the screen. The GPX app blinked awake the point, hunting, then settling coordinates steady as satellites agreed. Save. Waypoint 2023 1014 2248. Roll. If someone says I was lost, the track will disagree. If a clip gets cut to fit a story, the metadata holds still. I took one photograph. No flash, a held breath, ledge in low relief, the stone, a small continent, the valley, a dark ocean. The shutter sighed. I checked the XIF, then put the phone away. Night closed around the small noise and went back to itself. Names taught patience, made marks in a ledger only I would see. One slow, one quick, one swallowed when a gust slapped my mouth. I repeated a few because once felt like leaving too soon. I do not cry here. Tears are not proof to me. Another shift in the brush, a twig's click. I leaned my hip to the rock and listened up. Orion climbed. The dipper poured its empty bowl toward a ridge that swallowed it. I counted to ride out the shake that arrives when the body remembers before the mind chooses to. The stone cooled under my palm and steadied the tremor like a coin, keeping paper from running in a draft. I finished the names and came to attention in a dark that asked for no witness. Present, sir? Somewhere below, a lens hunted for light and found a little, just enough to make a shaky rectangle where none should be. I didn't see it. I sensed the misstroke in the air. I capped the thermos, thumbed the pale vein up the stone's middle, made the last note clear cold. Names complete. Waypoint saved, and signed my initials the way we sign for supply. Took what I meant to take, left what I was bound to leave. I turned the lamp back on red again. I checked the ground for pencil and cap. Cold wrapped my wrists, walked my bones. I tucked the stone into my inside pocket and felt it ride there like a heart given a second job. Back down the trail, leaves made a hush underfoot. Ghosts are places where love has nowhere better to go. At the car, I let the heater breathe on my knuckles while the track synced to the cloud. Checkmark. The photo spun, then settled. Tiny certainties. I held them like a climber holds an anchor. Later, when they played the footage, shaky, grainy, the woods turning as if the night were drunk, they called it evidence. They muted the wind and amplified my breath until it sounded like breaking. They let the camera wobble when my voice said names and cut everything that made the ridge a church. They had turned my prayer into a pathology. The place that raised me was already sold out from under me. The gravel drive that used to sing with my childhood bike tires felt foreign when I pulled off the road. Autumn wind cut through the maples, shaking bronze leaves across the yard. And in the center, stabbed into the lawn like a verdict, was a red and white sign, "Sold." The Hale House. The roof that heard every argument, the hallway that held my metal in silence was no longer ours. A minivan sat crooked in the drive hatch, open boxes stacked with names I didn't know. The porch boards groaned under strangers' shoes. I stepped out of the car. The air smelled like old smoke, like pumpkins rotting sweetly on steps. My throat closed. I hadn't seen the house in years, but I had believed naively that no matter how far I ran, this plot would still carry my shadow. Now it was stripped, sign taken. My phone shook in my hand as I called Ethan. He answered on the second ring, his voice casual, too casual. "Oh, that. You signed the power of attorney, remember? Back when you were at Walter Reed. You said you didn't want the burden." My knees locked. My TBI scars whispered doubt. Blank weeks fogged days. Could I have signed something? Could I have forgotten? He spoke so calmly that the edges of certainty dissolved. I began. But he cut me off. "Check your files if you like." "You wanted freedom, Charlotte. This is me helping." Helping. I hung up before the word poisoned me further. Charlotte, Mrs. Whitaker's voice startled me from across the fence. She still wore her heavy wool cardigan, same as when she brought pies in my childhood. She clutched her mug against the cold. "I saw Maddie here. With a realtor. Must have been July." She looked pleased as punch-measuring curtains, laughing with the agent. The words drove like nails. Maddie. My brother's perfect ornament. Her hand had turned the key, smiling as she sold my memories to strangers. I forced a smile for Mrs. Whitaker, but my chest burned. I lifted my phone, pulled up the listing Ethan had sent months back with fake cheer. "Look how much it's worth now. I should have read it then." Now I scrolled, saving every photo: living room, stripped kitchen counters, gleaming the porch where I used to sit with summer bruises. I saved them all, then opened the info pane. XIF data glowed, timestamps, coordinates, camera model. Proof that the pictures had been taken months earlier, long before I'd ever been told. Hashes locked them in time. Evidence that couldn't lie even when people did. The lawn's sold sign rattled in the wind like mock applause. My hand tightened on the phone until my knuckles whitened. If they thought they could gaslight me into doubting my own memory, they'd learn memory wasn't my only ledger. Machines remember too. Dates, coordinates, fingerprints of light. They had used my injury as a weapon. Now I would turn their arrogance into my shield. The neighbor waved goodnight, but I barely registered. I stood staring at the house at the window that used to be mine until the moving crew's laughter floated through it. That place no longer belonged to me. But the record, the truth did. If I couldn't trust my mind, I would have to trust the evidence. Pity was Maddie's weapon, and a country club was her battlefield. Cypress Country Club smelled of polish and old money. Chandeliers poured warm light that magnified pearls. Pastel dresses drifted over carpet that erased footsteps. I kept to the border with a teacup that didn't know my hand. Maddie moved like a hostess who owned the air. Hair pinned to effortlessness, smile tuned to sympathetic. She slid beside me and took my arm. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my sister-in-law, Charlotte Hale," she sang. "She's a true hero. War changes people, and Charlotte has been through so much. We must all be very patient with her." The last sentence settled like a shawl. Heads tilted. "Poor thing," someone breathed. Two women in near-identical pastels leaned together. One still managed the stage whisper. "Maddie said she's unstable since Syria." So sad. Their eyes touched me the way you tap a glass you won't buy. I raised the cup and let the heat steady my hands. Inside my jacket, the recorder waited. Virginia's one-party consent law was a cool hand at my back. I found the switch and pressed. A red dot blinked and vanished. Between teaspoons and engineered laughter sentences fell. Maddie's been such a saint. PTSD, I heard. She shouldn't be alone with paperwork. The court will help her. Their pity organized itself into a chorus line. Maddie tightened her grip, compassion arranged on her face. "You're doing so well, Charlotte," she cooed. "So courageous to let people support you." The sentence wore silk gloves. Underneath it carried handcuffs. I set the cup down before porcelain met my teeth wrong. Rage rose like a migraine aura, but rage is noisy. I chose still water. Smile. Breathe. Let the tape work. A woman with a fox brooch patted my shoulder. "You must miss routine," she said. "Maddie's been tireless." Her voice folded pity into praise. Rumor dripped into open ears. My rank dissolved into an anecdote that made everyone here feel generous. Servers refreshed tea. When Maddie turned away, I checked the recorder running still. It felt heavier than metal should, like a stone that knew names. I built the chain date time venue participants. I pictured the waveform a lawyer would hear. "People don't understand," Maddie told a woman in choral. "Trauma rewires the brain. Charlotte needs structure. She's safer when we handle the details." The woman nodded. "It's lucky she has you," she said. I excused myself toward a window. Outside, oaks shook loose leaves. I set my cup on the sill and waited for my reflection to settle. Then I returned to the swarm. If pity was a currency today, I would collect receipts. The program wound on. At the end, Maddie squeezed my fingers with a PR-perfect grip. "See? That wasn't so hard," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. I didn't move my face. On my way out, the pastels crossed my path again. "It's admirable she's not defensive," said one. "Medication can help," said the other. The recorder took it all without judgment. In the parking lot, the sun was worn brass. My jaw ached from the smile I'd kept framed. I slid behind the wheel, shut the door, and breathed. Then I checked the file timestamp duration ambient peaks. I named it Cypress 2023-1028 Ruma and backed it up. I noted times and drafted chain of custody lines. I added a label with room name and table number, noted chandelier hum in the noise profile, and saved a checksum beside the time code so the file could testify without me. I started the engine. The chandeliers were already preparing for another evening. I let the engine idle and felt the recorder cool in my palm. "Good girl," Maddie had said near the end. The audio would catch it. Let her keep her script. If pity was her script, I had just taped her first rehearsal. If this chapter struck a chord with you, don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now and walk with me into the next part of the story. They lured me with coffee, but the bill came in chains. The Starbucks on Broad Street smelled of cinnamon and espresso, soft music drifting under the clatter of cups. The place looked harmless, posters of pumpkin lattes, chalkboard quotes about gratitude, but the scene had been staged. Maddie's text had framed it as just a talk with someone who cares. The corner table waited like a trap. Dr. Keene was already there. A man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, a gray blazer and glasses that caught the light just enough to look trustworthy. His smile had that soft tilt professionals practice in mirrors. "Charlotte," he said warmly as I slid into the chair. "I'm glad you came. This is just a conversation." The hiss of steamed milk covered the tightness in my throat. I wrapped my hands around the paper cup, drawing comfort from the heat, and began to talk. About Syria. About Ortiz's laughter echoing in the desert, about the stone he'd pressed into my palm like a secret. About the morning he bled out in the sand while I kept repeating his name, hoping the sound could tether him to earth. My voice dropped lower with each word. The grief never dulled. Speaking it out loud scraped old wounds raw. Keene nodded with professional gravity, pen scratching against his notebook. "Too smooth, too eager." "That must feel like carrying ghosts," he murmured. His tone was rehearsed. My skin prickled. That's when I saw it, a faint blink of red on the table reflecting off the polished chrome of his phone case. Not a notification. Too steady, too deliberate. My pulse slowed. They weren't here to listen. They were here to capture. I leaned back, letting the silence stretch. Then I leaned in again, speaking clearly. I dropped in a phrase no one else would ever use, a verbal watermark. Sometimes the night feels like a locked greenhouse trapping breath until dawn. Ridiculous, specific, impossible to invent twice. If those words surfaced in a psychiatric report, I would know exactly where they came from. Keen smiled as if he'd just mined gold. Thank you for sharing that. He adjusted his phone and the red light blinked again. I reached for my spoon to stir coffee that didn't need stirring. The surface flashed like a mirror. I angled it just enough to catch the reflection, his device screen faintly lit recording app running. One tap of my thumb and I had a picture. He guided me back toward sorrow, asking about loneliness, about disorientation. I answered just enough, keeping my smile faint, giving them the performance they thought they owned. But inside the ledger clicked another entry. Evidence. Their eagerness had become malpractice. I stood sliding my chair back with deliberate calm. Keen looked startled. Leaving so soon, I've said enough for today, I replied. My voice was steady. My smile practiced. I dropped the spoon back onto the saucer, its metal ringing like a gavel. Walking out, the air hit cooler, sharper. The traffic noise of Broad Street felt cleaner than anything inside that cafe. In my pocket, the photo waited, time-stamped, geo-tagged. A mirror had caught their scheme. If they wanted a performance, I had given them a script with my fingerprint on it. When the summons came, I stopped being a sister and became a soldier again. Afternoon sun knifed through the blinds of my Richmond apartment, striping the boxes. The mailman buzzed. Minutes later, he pressed a thick envelope into my hand, said my last name, like bad news. It had weight. I set it on the counter beside Ortiz's stone and slit the flap with my house key. Petition for guardianship. Ethan Hale and Madeline Hale petitioners. My name, beneath, like a toe tag. Exhibits psychiatric evaluation statements of concern, alleged irregularities. I laid each page flat and read like I was clearing a room. The evaluation was dated 2 weeks ago, signed in a poured pen stroke. The clinic masthead was a pasted image at a different ratio than the body text. PDF properties created, 02:13 a.m. Modified 02:09 a.m. time, going backward. Font swapped mid-paragraph. A notary shadow repeated. They hadn't expected a major with a magnifier. My phone vibrated. Ethan. I let it ring, then answered on the last beat. Just sign the waiver, Carly, he said, velvet over gravel. Let the court help you? We'll make this easy. Define easy, I said. A pause, a smile I could hear. You keep your stipend. We handle the rest. No courtroom scene, no embarrassment. I set him on speaker and took notes, time-stamped. I don't recall signing away the house. You did. Walter Reed? He said, patient as if explaining stoplights. Trauma blurs things. That's why we're stepping in. Rage rose, but training pinned it. I touched the stone. The oath card in my drawer said, defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Oaths don't expire. Send counsel to me in writing, I said, and hung up before his temper bled through. Mission mode arrived like muscle memory. I scanned the packet saved as PDF-A computed hashes and wrote the values beside the file names. I exported properties, printed them, photographed the printouts with the day's paper. I opened my notebook, chain-logged date, time, who touched what. I checked the clinic address. The suite was a dental office on Mondays. I reran the house listing photos, aligning XIF with Mrs. Whitaker's timeline. I encrypted everything with GPG and zipped a second copy with AES 256. Then I drafted a sitrep to Colin Marcus Reed, subject domestic fraud, identity misuse, Bulleting facts like coordinates forged POA suspected, pity campaign, covert Starbucks recording captured via reflection, guardianship petition with inconsistent metadata. Before send, I added the line doctrine taught me request guidance, ready to execute within ROE. I pushed the files through a secure channel we'd used for after-action reviews, then set my phone face down and waited with my hands open on the counter. His reply landed in minutes. Read didn't waste words. Received. We'll handle it. But we'll need you focused. A second message followed Creed to match command. When they weaponize your wounds, we weaponize the truth. I printed the email, signed the margin-logged receipt. I labeled a fresh manila envelope, evidence guardianship, and slid the papers inside, sealing the flap with red tape. The apartment shifted from way station to forward operating base. I stacked supplies, drives, legal pads, coffee the stone. The light slid along the countertop like a slow metronome. Dusk pooled at the window. Traffic stitched a seam through Broad Street. I read the petition again, slower, letting the poison show seams. Every sentence assumed I'd surrendered to the version of me they'd written. I recited my oath softly, a mouthguard before a fight. I wasn't a sister on that counter anymore. I was a soldier with paperwork for a weapon and time for a trigger. For the first time, I felt less like prey and more like mission ready. The courtroom smelled of polish and pity, and I was cast as the tragedy. The gallery was packed, neighbors, reporters, the curious. Polished benches bounced narrow ladders of light up paneled walls. Whispers traveled in drafts. I sat at counsel table with my hands folded and Ortiz's Virginia stone warm in my pocket. The bailiff called the room to order. We rose. Judge Harris took the bench with the careful fatigue of a man who has seen too many rehearsed sorrows. Attorney Keene, rose charcoal suit, shellacked hair, smile that never reached his eyes. Your Honor, he said, this petition is born of love. My clients Ethan and Madeline Hale have done everything to help Charlotte. But she is not our Charlotte anymore. He stepped aside. Ethan walked to the lectern in navy wool and certainty. He didn't look at me. He addressed the room. My sister has always been brave, he said, breaking cleanly. She served. She sacrificed. We admire that. But the trauma has changed her. She wanders at night. She talks to people who aren't there. She cannot manage the simplest paperwork. She's not our Charlotte anymore. The line landed twice. Maddie dabbed an immaculate tear chin angled toward a lens. She wore concern like cloth. When the judge glanced, she lowered her eyes, a portrait of reluctant duty. Keene returned. We don't come to take. We come to safeguard. To protect her from the world and tragically from herself. He tapped a folder. Exhibit A. A screen whispered down as the lights cooled. The video played moon-silvered trees, a lens that trembled. There I was, dark jacket hair tugged by wind. The microphone loved breath. Quiet sounded like breaking. Names rose and fell, trimmed. Ortiz's name hung without the men, the stone, the ledger of memory. The clip froze on my mouth, shaping percent sir, inviting the worst inference, and none of the truth I carried there. A murmur ran through the gallery. Judge Harris's face softened like varnish gloss without change beneath. He leaned forward. Ms. Hale, he said gently, do you wish to make a statement? The room turned toward me. I felt Maddie's stare, hungry for an outburst. I felt Ethan's calm, a hinge expecting me to swing. I breathed once. The stone's edge found my palm and steadied the skin. Chosen silence has a temperature. It cools argument. It slows the heart. I let the quiet widen. Keene shifted, puzzled, then smiled. The judge waited. I studied the blank screen. Keene filled the gap. Your Honor, we also submit a psychiatric evaluation, he said, and statements from respected members of the community who fear for Ms. Hale's well-being. He used my surname like a diagnosis. He read lines designed to bruise without fingerprints. Maddie's hand drifted to Ethan's sleeve, a tableau of steadfastness. Cameras drank it in. The judge frowned at the report, then at me. "This is difficult," he murmured. "Ms. Hale's service leaves scars." The word scars softened the room another degree. People leaned toward costless mercy. I could have named the lies the video cut free of its context, the phrases I'd watermarked repeating in Keene's recital, the dates that refused to agree with the sun. I could have told the story of a country club rehearsal on audio of a power of attorney notarized by a ghost of a coffee shop where a spoon caught a blinking red eye. Instead, I sat in the role they wrote and said nothing. The courtroom expected collapse or rage. I gave neither. Silence turned their script inside out. Sensing momentum, Keene nodded toward the gallery that wanted to be a jury. "We ask the court to act compassionately and decisively." He made compassion and decisive pretend to be the same word. Judge Harris exhaled, smoothing his conclusion. "I will review all submissions," he said. His gaze lingered on the frozen frame, my mouth parted on a name that kept my tongue behind my teeth. I did not blink. I let the pity lap at my shoes and go no higher. The clock ticked once loud as a metronome in a quiet hall. They had buried me once with silence. Now they tried to do it again. A diagnosis I never heard of was about to steal my name. The courtroom's air had gone stale by the afternoon session, heavy with paper polish and the kind of sympathy that feels more like surveillance. I sat where I had been all morning, my hands folded, the Virginia stone hidden in my jacket. The bailiff announced the next exhibit, and Attorney Keene rose as if he were presenting gospel, not theater. His voice slid into the hush with practiced gravity. "Your Honor," he said, "this evaluation comes from a highly respected clinic. Prestigious, independent, without bias. It documents sadly the decline of Ms. Hale." He lifted the folder as though its weight were proof. The gold-embossed letterhead glinted like authority itself. He passed it up to Judge Harris with 2 fingers, gentle as if handling scripture. The judge adjusted his glasses, lips pressing together. His eyes lowered to the first page. I watched the transformation come over his face, the shift from weariness to pity. He read silently, then aloud enough for the gallery to hear. Borderline personality disorder, paranoid ideations, systematic delusions likely stemming from severe PTSD. Each phrase hit the wood-paneled chamber like a gavel strike. A chorus of murmurs rippled through the benches. I sat frozen, though every muscle in me wanted to lunge forward and snatch the paper from his hands. My chest burned, my jaw locked. These words were not mine yet. They were being tied to my name, welded like shackles I had never forged. Maddie dabbed her eyes again, her performance in full bloom. Ethan rested a hand on her shoulder, the picture of familial despair. Cameras clicked from the back row. Pity had found its perfect portrait. I focused on the page itself, straining to read from across the room. The lines blurred at distance, but a few words leapt like arrows. Then buried halfway down the paragraph I saw it. A phrase too odd, too specific, too out of place, a storm that forgets its shore. My lungs clenched. That was my phrase. I had invented it deliberately at the corner table in Starbucks. A watermark of words slipped like a tracer die into the conversation. If it surfaced anywhere, I would know exactly where it had been stolen. And now, here it was, in black ink, on a clinic stationery signed by a doctor I had never met. The realization sliced through the fog of fury. They hadn't just stolen my grief. They had copied my watermark. Their forgery carried my fingerprint. The very device they had hidden in a coffee shop had captured my words, twisted them, and carried them into evidence. And in their arrogance, they had left the trail I had laid for them. Judge Harris lowered the page, his expression softened, as if the report confirmed every suspicion, every rumor Ethan and Maddie had carefully seeded. He looked at me the way one looks at a wounded animal's sadness wrapped in dismissal. It should have broken me. Instead, it steadied me. I knew now that their own weapon had turned back toward them. Keene smiled thinly. Your Honor, this confirms our concern. Ms. Hale cannot distinguish between memory and delusion. Her service left her tragically broken. He gestured toward me as if I were a cautionary tale. Maddie's tears glittered in the chandelier light. Ethan lowered his gaze like a saint in mourning. But I sat still, breathing slow, memorizing every tick of the clock, every word on the page. This wasn't just an attack. It was evidence. Proof that their lies were born of theft, that my voice, misused and misplaced, would be the very cord that tied them to fraud. I clenched my hands beneath the table nails, biting into skin until I felt the sting. Rage had turned cold again, sharp as ice. They thought they had silenced me with paper shackles. Instead, they had just handed me the key. Their forgery carried my fingerprint. They asked if I had anything to say. I had something better proof. November 21st, 2023. The courthouse hummed heels on marble low voices. I sat at the defense table with hands folded, Ortiz's Virginia stone anchoring my pocket, a brown envelope sealed with red tape heavy at my side. Morning light laid pale bars across the floor. The clock ticked for a play I refused to perform. The bailiff called us to order. Attorney Keene stood with the confidence of a finale bow. Your Honor, in light of the unrebutted evaluation and exhibits, we move for summary judgment, he said, palm open as if blessing the room. Let compassion do its work. Judge Harris rubbed the bridge of his nose, then looked down at me with a tired kindness that assumed surrender. Ms. Hale, last chance, any response? I didn't rise. I unlatched my briefcase and slid the envelope across the wood. The tape flashed like a flare. Chain of custody intact, I said. The bailiff delivered it. Harris broke the seal, drew out the first document, and his posture shifted by a degree only soldiers notice. The SOCOM crest caught the light. A cover letter. Then a log access records tying my stolen credentials to IPs registered to a Raleigh office in Ethan's firm, timestamps beside airline receipts. Next, a chart of shell companies stepping payments through Delaware like water through rock. Keene tried a reflexive objection, relevance hearsay, but the judge raised a hand without looking. Another page, a Syrian Depot manifest date circled in red, C. Hale at the bottom, in a hand that wasn't mine. Beside it, a stroke order overlay, my verified signature matched against the forged one. Pressure points misaligned. Conclusion: simulation. He kept reading. An affidavit by Sergeant Tom Walker described a diverted shipment of medical supplies, lot numbers, pallet counts, a last-minute reroute authorized by a subcontractor now shown to be owned by one of Ethan's shells. Harris's lips thinned. He turned again, a transcript from Cypress Country Club, the Pity PR, where Maddie rehearsed my decline checksum in the margin to bind audio to ink. After that, a photograph caught in a spoon at a Starbucks corner table, Keene's device recording red light faint. Harris looked up at last. Pity burned off something colder taking its seat. He rifled to the back a memo on SOCOM letterhead signed by Colin Marcus Reed, certifying liaison and vouching for the integrity of the attached logs. The judge's gaze moved to Ethan. For the first time, my brother looked smaller than his suit. Keene tried again, thinner now. Your Honor, this is counsel sit. Harris said, the edge in his voice making the gallery go still enough to hear the HVAC breathe. Maddie's hand slid off Ethan's sleeve. My breath matched the stone's cool cadence in my palm. Reed's promise threaded the silence, weaponized the truth. Harris turned another page, then another, reading faster, each sheet sharpening his expression. He closed the folder, opened it again, then set it on the bench with the caution due a live device. A reporter lowered her pen. The gallery's appetite turned to ash. Ethan's eyes flicked to the doors, searching for exits that weren't there. Be advised. This court will recess. Bailiff, secure the room. The gavel cracked the air. Doors thudded shut. 2 U.S. marshals who had looked like furniture a moment ago were suddenly the only color that mattered. Keene's mouth worked a fish out of water. Ethan stared at the envelope as if it might decide to apologize. I did not move. I had given them nothing all morning but silence. Now paper spoke in a language they could not edit. The bailiff locked the doors. A marshal's radio murmured. Through the glass, more dark suits gathered like weather. I let my hands unclasp and set my palm flat on the table, feeling the wood grain steady reel. The ledger in my head drew a hard line and signed it. Sirens drew near. The play was over. The arrests were about to begin. Justice didn't walk in quietly, it marched in 12 abreast. The doors of the Richmond courtroom burst open with a force that swallowed the murmurs. Boots struck marble in perfect cadence, the kind of rhythm that drills itself into the bones of anyone who has ever stood on a parade field. 12 men in green berets filled the doorway, combat uniforms pressed sharp, their silence heavier than any accusation. The gallery gasped. Even the judge straightened as if the weight of history had just entered his courtroom. Ethan whipped his head toward them, his voice cracking with a brittle bravado. "What is this circus?" His cufflinks glinted under the overhead lights, sweat bleeding into the starch of his shirt. Maddie half rose from her seat, the handkerchief she had so carefully displayed slipping unnoticed to the floor. Her composure cracked in the space of a heartbeat. Judge Harris gestured with deliberate gravity. "Proceed." The U.S. Marshals moved first, two plain-suited officers stepping forward with the calm inevitability of gravity. One read from a card, his tone steady, impersonal. "Ethan Hale. You are under arrest for violations of the False Claims Act, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the United States." Ethan's smirk twitched, then collapsed into panic. "She's insane. She's making this up." He jabbed a trembling finger toward me. "Look at her. She's been unstable for years, you all saw it." But his words fell against a wall of silence more immovable than stone. The 12 berets had crossed the floor, moving into position behind me. Their boots struck the wood in synchronized echoes. They halted in formation, shoulders squared, eyes forward. A ripple went through the gallery like wind through wheat. I sat motionless, but my breath steadied as if synced to theirs. For years I had carried silence as a wound. Today it was a weapon sharpened by their presence. "Stand," one marshal ordered. Ethan's knees buckled as the cuffs snapped shut with a metallic finality. The sound rang like a verdict. He struggled, twisting to face me, his face pale with disbelief. "Charlotte, you can't do this to me. You're my sister." 12 hands moved in unison. The berets rose in salute, crisp, deliberate, unwavering. The air thickened with something sacred, heavier than applause, deeper than pity. It was the kind of recognition no courtroom could counterfeit. The judge's gavel rapped once. "Let the record reflect," he said grimly. "This proceeding will continue under protection of federal custody." Maddie gasped, a sound more animal than human. The silk handkerchief she had clutched for months lay crumpled at her feet, forgotten. Her mask was gone. Only naked fear remained. Ethan stumbled as the marshals pulled him toward the doors, shouting half-formed protests, a man stripped of costume mid-performance. The gallery watched in stunned silence, their pity now turned inward, ashamed of how easily they had believed him. I finally stood. My voice cut through the thick air, low but steady, a blade honed on years of betrayal. "You lied when you called me your sister." The words struck harder than any gavel. Ethan froze for a fraction of a second, the last shred of control draining from his eyes before the marshals dragged him out into the corridor. The 12 berets held their salute until the doors shut behind him. Then the silence remained vast and unbroken, the kind that meant justice had finally spoken. The only sound left was silence, and it was mine. Thanksgiving morning arrived crisp, the air cutting like glass. The courthouse doors opened, spilling us onto the wide stone steps. Reporters leaned forward, microphones raised, but the noise seemed to falter as if the November wind swallowed it. I held Ortiz's stone in my pocket, edges worn smooth, steadying the tremor that came from something deeper than nerves. A woman in a navy suit intercepted me, briefcase in one hand, envelope in the other. "Ms. Hale," she said simply. She passed me the certified deed to the Hale estate along with the court order dismissing Ethan's petition. No speeches, no fanfare, just paper stamped and real. Chain of custody for peace. I signed her receipt, slipped the envelope close to my chest, and exhaled. Then I heard it. Boots scuffing pavement, not military cadence, but something close. Veterans older and younger lined the base of the steps. Some wore dress blues, others caps bleached by sun. They didn't need orders. They moved as if drawn by one rhythm. Hands lifted in unison, salutes catching the light. For a moment the entire street held still. Cameras clicked softer, uncertain how to capture silence given shape. Phones vibrated across the press pool, alerts buzzing. A headline bloomed, leaked emails revealed Maddie feeding Dr. Keene phrases to use my watermark among them. Reporters stared, torn between watching me and reading their screens. Maddie's playbook had burned in public, and I hadn't spoken a word. I opened the envelope. The deed bore my parents' names, then mine stamped final. I thought of the science medal once left beside a gravy-stained napkin. That ache rose and then passed like surf receding. The past had carved me down, but this paper rebuilt what remained. One veteran, face lined but eyes bright, stepped forward. "Major," he said, steady, nothing more. He didn't ask for words. He knew silence was enough. Behind him, the others kept their salute, a living wall of acknowledgement. I lifted the deed, slightly whispered so only I could hear, "This speaks for me." Microphones caught nothing. The phrase wasn't for headlines, it was for ghosts, and for myself. The lawyer in Navy gave a small nod, business concluded. The crowd pressed closer but stopped at the invisible barrier those salutes created. I felt Ortiz's stone against the paper, two artifacts, one carved by earth, one by law, meeting under my hand. And in that meeting, an idea, a place built of timber and air at the foot of the Blue Ridge, where silence could be haven, not weapon. A young Marine lowered his hand. The line followed and sound seeped back into the world. Reporters shouted for a statement, cameras rose higher. I shook my head. The verdict had already been delivered in the only language I trusted. I sealed the envelope again, pressed the crease with my thumb the way one presses a wound closed. Thanksgiving tables across Virginia would be loud that night. Mine would be quiet, but chosen quiet, healing quiet, gunpowder and loss. That's what victory always smelled like, but at least it was mine. When you've walked through fire, silence becomes your sharpest sword. I stood against betrayal from those who should have defended me, and I learned that justice is never handed over, it's carved out with patient scars and proof. I want to hear your voice. What would you say to someone who was told they were crazy just for standing in their truth? Leave your words below, I'll carry them like the salutes I once received. And remember, in life, your silence is not weakness. Use it as armor, use it as power, and one day, let it become your verdict.